Thick, acrid black smoke is currently rising over the skyline of the financial capital of the Middle East. Emergency responders are frantically pulling the shattered, smoldering fuselage of an intercepted Iranian drone out of the collapsed roof of a residential villa. 4 Asian nationals, 2 Indians, 1 Sri Lankan, and 1 Bangladeshi, are bleeding on the pavement, receiving urgent triage from paramedics. They are the latest collateral damage in a war that is rapidly, undeniably spinning out of control. The Dubai Media Office has just issued its official statement. The interceptions were successful. The highest safety standards were maintained. The explosions were part of routine defensive measures. But that is the sanitized, public-facing version of reality. That is the press release. Here is what is actually happening. The United Arab Emirates Ministry of Defense has just engaged 8 ballistic missiles, 4 cruise missiles, and 36 unmanned aerial vehicles launched from Iranian territory in a single morning. Since this war began on February 28th, the UAE's air defense systems have tracked and engaged exactly 433 ballistic missiles, 19 cruise missiles, and 1,977 UAVs. This is not a border skirmish. This is a regional conflagration. But the falling debris in Dubai, the injured civilians, the burning abandoned houses, these are merely the symptoms of a much larger, much more dangerous game currently being played in the shadows. Signal number 1 just flashed red. The secret offer is officially on the table. Here's what nobody is telling you about the backdoor negotiations happening right now. That's not speculation. That's what intelligence officials are saying privately behind closed doors in Washington, Tehran, and Jerusalem. There is a third person in the room. Someone pulling the strings of this entire diplomatic high-wire act from thousands of miles away. I will tell you exactly who that is, and why their presence changes the entire calculus of this war. But you need to understand the brutal battlefield reality first. Right now, the United States and Israel are executing a synchronized, systematic dismantling of the Islamic Republic's military infrastructure. Over the past 32 days, the combined U.S.-Israeli forces have struck exactly 13,000 targets inside Iranian territory. U.S. President Donald Trump has stated there are roughly 3,000 targets left on the board. The Israel Defense Forces have completely eliminated over 80% of Iran's entire air defense network. Just hours ago, Israeli F-35s bypassed what little radar coverage remained to obliterate a critical air defense site in Naushar, up in the Mazandaran province near the Caspian Sea. They have struck 40 defense industrial sites in the past 48 hours alone, including the heavily fortified Saba Battery Warehouse in the Pasargad industrial town near Tehran. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that the U.S. Navy has destroyed 150 Iranian vessels. That represents 92% of Iran's largest naval assets. The 4th Artesh Naval District headquarters at Bandar Anzali Port is a smoking crater. The Iranian military machine is bleeding out from 1,000 cuts. But the regime in Tehran has one final desperate card to play, and they are playing it right now. They have closed the Strait of Hormuz. This is the ultimate geopolitical domino effect. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, despite having their conventional navy decimated, has deployed asymmetrical warfare to choke off the world's most critical energy artery. They are using remaining drones and anti-ship ballistic missiles, fired from mobile launchers hidden in the Zagros Mountains, to threaten any tanker attempting to transit the 21-mile-wide choke point. Just today, a Kuwaiti tanker, the Al Salmi, was attacked by an Iranian drone right off the coast of Dubai. An Indian flag tanker, the Jag Ladki, barely made it to port in Mundra with its cargo of UAE crude. The United Nations maritime body has called emergency talks. South Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun is publicly pleading for safe navigation. Why? Because the math is terrifying. If the Strait of Hormuz remains closed for another 14 days, the daily global shortfall of 20 million barrels of oil will trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. Oil will hit $250 a barrel almost overnight. The S&P 500 will drop 15% in 48 hours, vaporizing trillions in global wealth. Gas will hit $9 at the pump in the American Midwest just as the summer driving season approaches. The International Monetary Fund is already warning of a severe global recession. The global economy is a loaded gun, and the IRGC has its finger resting heavily on the trigger. This brings us to the shuttle diplomacy, the desperate, frantic movement of messages across encrypted lines and neutral capitals. The United States is not talking to Iran directly. Everything is fractured. Everything is filtered. In Muscat, Oman, earlier this month, the initial framework was laid down. The U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, sat in one room. The Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, sat in another. Messages were physically carried back and forth down a heavily guarded hotel hallway by the Omani Foreign Minister, Badr bin Hamad al-Busaidi. The talks were agonizingly slow, incredibly tense, and ultimately derailed by the sheer momentum of the violence outside. But diplomacy did not die, it just went underground. Over the past 72 hours, the channel has reopened, this time via a regular, unsecure cellular connection bouncing between Tehran and the United States. Arachi is on one end of the line, Witkoff is on the other. And Arachi is delivering a message that Washington has been waiting a month to hear. The Iranian foreign minister claims he has the explicit consent and blessing of Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader who took power after his father, Ali Khamenei, was killed in the opening salvos of the war on February 28. Mojtaba has supposedly given the green light to close the matter quickly. The terms? The complete removal of Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpile, roughly 60 kilograms of weapons-grade material, shipped directly to Russia. In exchange, the bombing stops, the strait reopens, and the regime survives. It sounds like a breakthrough. It sounds like the off-ramp the world is desperately praying for. But here is the catch. The hardliners are actively sabotaging the peace process from the inside. Within Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps views any concession as a fatal display of weakness. IRGC Commander-in-Chief General Hossein Salami is not listening to the foreign ministry. Salami is publicly promising to open the gates of hell on the invaders. The IRGC is deploying Popular Mobilization Forces proxy fighters into western Iran to prepare for a grueling ground insurgency. Protesters are massing outside the foreign ministry in Tehran, demanding an end to all negotiations with the Americans. The internal friction is tearing the regime apart. There is a very real possibility that Arachi is dangerously freelancing, or that Mojtaba Khamenei does not actually have operational control over the IRGC missile commands currently launching hardware at Dubai. If the IRGC decides they would rather see the Islamic Republic burn than surrender their nuclear ambitions, no piece of paper signed in Oman or agreed to over a cell phone will stop the ballistic missiles from flying. And the friction is not just in Tehran. In Jerusalem, the Israeli government is watching these back-channel talks with absolute fury. Israeli officials were not invited to the Oman talks. They are not on the cell phone calls. They are learning about the potential survival of the Iranian regime through intelligence leaks. The hardliners in Israel, operating under a wartime mandate to permanently eliminate the existential threat to their borders, have zero interest in a deal that leaves the IRGC intact. The Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon, stood before the Security Council and explicitly stated that Israel's objective is to dismantle the nuclear program, break the terror proxy network, and stop the existential threat once and for all. For Israel, a ceasefire that allows Iran to rebuild its decimated air defenses and restock its drone factories is not peace. It is merely a pause before the next war. So, the IDF accelerates the bombing. Every time Witkoff and Arachi make progress, another Iranian defense factory is turned to ash. Another Hezbollah proxy in Lebanon is targeted. Another provocation is launched to force the IRGC to retaliate, thereby making peace politically impossible for Tehran. It is a deadly feedback loop of escalation. Remember that third person in the room I mentioned earlier, the one pulling the strings of this bizarre diplomatic dance? It is Jared Kushner, the former president's son-in-law, operating completely outside the traditional institutional boundaries of the State Department, is sitting right next to Steve Witkoff during these high-stakes calls. In a staggering breach of all known diplomatic protocol, Witkoff and Kushner have been conducting these negotiations from public places in the United States. At one point on Thursday, Witkoff was standing in a public location, speaking so loudly into his cell phone that passers-by could literally hear the granular details of the American ultimatum regarding nuclear enrichment on Iranian soil. This is the unorthodox, highly irregular nature of the current global order. There are no 10-person interagency teams drafting cautious memos. There is a real estate developer and a family member negotiating the fate of the Middle East on a cell phone, while Tomahawk cruise missiles and Iranian Shahed drones cross paths in the night sky over the Persian Gulf. In one of the most surreal moments of the entire conflict, Witkoff actually invited Foreign Minister Arachi to abandon the nuclear talks in Oman and come take a guided tour of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the massive Nimitz-class aircraft carrier currently projecting American naval dominance into the region. It was an invitation meant to intimidate, a blunt display of hard power, but it perfectly encapsulates the chaotic, almost theatrical approach to these negotiations. The stakes could not be higher, and the clock is ticking down to zero. The United States has delivered its final parameters. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has warned that Iran will pay a devastating price for the continued Houthi attacks on merchant shipping in the Red Sea crisis. The U.S. has demanded the full dismantling of all nuclear enrichment capabilities. No nuclear dust, no underground centrifuges spinning at Fordow or Natanz. If Iran refuses, President Trump has threatened to completely obliterate Iran's energy grid. He is not talking about military bases anymore. He is talking about the oil terminals at Karg Island, the refineries at Abadan, the power plants keeping the lights on in Tehran. The country is already suffering from daily rolling blackouts due to electricity shortages. If the U.S. targets the energy grid, the Iranian economy will instantly collapse into pre-industrial darkness. The civilian death toll, which human rights organizations report currently stands at 1,443, would skyrocket as essential services, water desalination, and hospital infrastructure critically fail. France, Britain, and Germany are standing by, ready to trigger the United Nations snapback mechanism to permanently reinstate crushing global sanctions, cutting Iran off from any hope of economic salvation. But here is the catch. The second pivot that turns everything upside down. The United States Central Command is realizing that forcing the Strait of Hormuz open through purely military means is an agonizingly complex and dangerous operation. You cannot simply bomb a choke point into safety. The Iranian coastline is a fortress of anti-ship missile batteries hidden deep within mountainous terrain. The waters are heavily mined. The U.S. can escort individual tankers, but they cannot guarantee the safety of the massive, slow-moving commercial fleets required to keep the global economy afloat. The insurance premiums for shipping companies have already become mathematically impossible to pay. Neutrals that violate their airspace. The war refuses to stay regional. It is bleeding outward, disrupting supply chains, inflaming domestic politics across the globe, and drawing in powers from Moscow to Beijing, who are watching closely to see if the American security umbrella will hold or fold under the extreme pressure. We are entering the terminal phase of this crisis. The negotiations have compressed into a timeline of hours, not weeks. The drafts have been exchanged. The terms are known. The back channels have exhausted their utility. The diplomats have spoken. The generals have threatened. And the missiles have been fired. Over 13,000 targets gone. The Iranian Supreme Leader's office has signaled a willingness to survive, but the revolutionary zealots within the military apparatus are prepared for martyrdom. The Israeli Air Force is fueled and waiting for the order to strike the nuclear sites directly, an action that would irradiate the region and guarantee a century of war. The American aircraft carriers are positioned, their strike groups holding the line in the Gulf, enforcing a blockade while simultaneously trying to prevent an economic apocalypse. The next 24 to 72 hours will dictate the trajectory of the 21st century. There is no middle ground left to occupy. There is no more room for diplomatic ambiguity or strategic patience. This is the absolute edge of the cliff. It is a binary choice. It is peace or war. It is a deal or it is bombs. We are either going to see a total breakthrough, where the uranium is shipped out, the strait is cleared, and the region steps back from the brink of total annihilation, or we are going to see a total collapse. The talks will fail, the hardliners will win, the energy grid will be obliterated, the global markets will crash, and the skies over the Middle East will ignite with a fire unlike anything we have ever seen.